Hi guys, I am here to talk to you about secondary sources for your essay number 3, the response essay. And before I cover what's on the screen, just a quick reminder that, I'll mention it in the homework, but that you could look at 2 example response essays in the PDF file that I uploaded. You'll recall that I mentioned it last Thursday that there's a chapter about response essays from a different textbook. Since our textbook doesn't have any information, I've provided this supplemental info. And I recommend that you look at least one of the response essays. One of them is about a film and one of them is about a piece of literature. And so even though you are looking at a nonfiction essay, a nonfiction text from our textbook, you could still draw some comparisons between the response essays in that chapter, PDF chapter that I've provided, and the one that you're writing, especially related to the outline or the conceptual outline that we had on the board tonight about where things go in a response essay. So check those out for sure. I'm trying to remember, I think the example response essay about the film has a secondary source. The response essay about the film is a response to Avatar, which was out, oh my gosh, probably at least 10 years ago now. But anyhow, there might be a secondary source in that one. I believe there is. All right, so again, talking to you about secondary sources. So what you see on the screen is 4 areas that you can think about, sort of categories for kinds of secondary sources that there are. And there are other kinds of sources too, but I kind of try to limit your thinking because you only need one secondary source. And Lucas asked if we could use more than one, and of course won't limit you in that way if you want to use 2 other sources, additional sources, excuse me, but 1 is required. And I would remind you that maybe for this assignment you kind of limit yourself to 1 only because it's important that we handle the sources well. It's not an assignment in, hey, can I show Beth that I can find a source and just plop it somewhere in my essay. It's find a source that's as academic as possible, and make sure that it relates to something that you're saying. So it's not going to do you much good just to plop a source in and not make connections between the secondary source you find and the response you're making. So what are the 4 categories? Well, the first thing you can do is research the author. We talked about this a little bit in class. You notice that I'm giving you a reminder that you could look at the background information that our textbook gives about the source that you're using for the response essay. You could also do some online research, biographical info, whatever. You could look into what other kinds of pieces the author has published. This is probably only applicable if you are trying to find out if he or she has written about the topic in more than one article, to see the breadth that the author has explored related to the topic. And so breadth just means, how many different ways has the writer written about it, how many different times. You might look to see if the author has his or her own website. A lot of writers do maintain their own websites or a blog. And then also check into the possibility that they have a public Twitter account or even a Facebook account. A lot of authors maintain those as well. Sometimes authors hire other people to do it, and sometimes they do it themselves, and the ones done by themselves are actually kind of interesting to look at to see if you can find any useful information. So I could look up stuff about Lars Eigner is sort of the point here, related to any of those things. So going to be referring to the dumpster diving essay. That's the one we've been kind of talking about as a whole class, just as a point of context. Topic related, you guys see I've listed that I could look up information about homelessness, to do a comparison or a contrast to what Eigner says about dumpster diving. I could check up on the information that he presents in his essay. Is it fair? Is it accurate? Is there something that's different about dumpsters these days that's not represented in the essay? And it's not necessarily the author's fault that he didn't catch it. It's just things change over time. So I just could, comment on something like that if I found it. And then if I thought he overlooked information, I could definitely call him on something like that. But having a source to back me up would be really helpful. Related to the writing, so what am I talking about here? So, you guys can respond to these sources any way you want, but sometimes people respond to the quality of the writing. And so you might even think about consider things we've talked about in class, exemplification. If I wanted to, I could have a body paragraph about Lars Eichner's dumpster diving, about how many fantastic, very specific examples he uses about scavenging and living off of what he scavenges. So I could look at exemplification. That's not listed on the handout you see on the screen, but I could look up other things. The first one is something we haven't talked about in class. I'm just kind of adding something here that might be of interest to you. It's pronounced anaphora, and it means repetition. And so there's effective repetition in writing, and I wonder if I could write a body paragraph in my response essay on Lars Eichner's use of anaphora to remind us of his what his life is like. This idea that he's scavenging and how many times he mentions the word, and what does that mean to readers when we keep hearing that word over and over again, or seeing it or reading it over and over again. You could also look up words like purpose, audience, tone, look up genre that you believe the author is writing in. Eichner seems to be doing sort of a combination report or an informative essay, but also sort of maybe a little bit of a memoir, definitely some narrative examples in there. So I could talk about what narrative is if I wanted to give the definition of memoir and then apply that or compare what I understand about memoir and how it works to the way the author uses it. I could use a source like that. So it's more sort of finding a source that's a definition and then applying that definition to the way the author writes. And last but not least, and this is perhaps the easiest one, you could go out and see if this essay that you're using for the response essay, your primary source, is online anywhere, and see, especially if it's in its original publication. So if it was, let's say, a New York Times article, is it still out on the Times website? Can you find it? And if it is, there may be people who have responded to the article, and you could use some of the readers of the website and their responses to the article, because as you know, we don't just go onto Facebook or Twitter or whatever to post stuff. Some of us go to a magazine or newspaper websites where these articles were originally published, and then they comment after they read the article because they're logged into a social media account or something like that. So you could definitely cite, I'll say another word, you could definitely, excuse me, find a secondary source where there's a reader's comment, and perhaps this comment is an opinion that aligns with yours and perhaps not. It's up to you how you want to use that. All right, so remember, your homework then is to bring a revised response essay draft to class. You don't need the secondary source actually in the essay, but what I need is, as I said in class, at least 2.5 pages of the draft, a summary, as many body paragraphs as possible. If you want to add a conclusion, you can, but remember, you don't have to, but you must find a secondary source. So all the things I've talked about tonight, about the kinds of secondary sources you might find, pick something and see what you can find. And if that doesn't work, pick something else and see what you can find. Please bring a printout of whatever you find on the web to your conference on Thursday. So when we go over your draft, we can talk about where you think the source will fit and how it's going to be related to the response that you are writing about for the primary source. All right, guys, take care, and I will see you at your conference on Thursday.